Eli James Miller.
What was that?
The emergency tone split the room at 2:13 a.m. The municipal alert voice saying, "Do not look outside," and Maya walked to the window anyway. Fear pinched my fingers until my knuckles whitened. I clipped the recorder on the couch arm and watched her pull the curtain aside with one hand. Voices on the alert repeated the order twice more, dry and practiced, but Maya's sneakers squeaked on my hallway runner as she leaned into the rain-lit glass. I knew then that the problem would not be solved by listening. It would be solved by what we refused or chose to see. I keep the watch on my wrist for a reason. The analog face reads like a promise of ordinary time. 12 ticks that keep pushing forward. I am 28, I live on Maple, I work nights in the hospital records office. Those facts fell into the first 5 minutes of that night like tools you pick up when something is broken. Fear, sharp, practical fear, was what made me wedge myself against the banister and stay where I could see Maya without stepping into the light. "Maya," I said, keeping my voice low so the mic's proximity would catch the two-syllable name. "Don't open it." "Don't." She didn't answer at first. Her silhouette in the window was a black cut against the orange of the street alert. The rain drew stripes across the pane. A porch light 3 houses down hummed and then went dead. An air of precise panic stepped into the hallway with her movements. "Ellie," she said finally, voice quick. "What if someone's hurt? What if it's my mom?" Her impulse was a human one. Check on family, check the street. That impulse collided with the municipal order. The conflict arrived as sound and motion. It was not a mood. I stepped to the living room's rim and put my palm where the window frame met the sill, feeling the cold paint under my fingers, and counted the choices. 2 minutes later, the first consequence arrived. A voice cracked on the other side of the block, thin and exact, like it had been recorded, and then played back wrong, calling Mrs. Lang's name. The porch light across the street turned off in the middle of the syllable. Someone shouted from the hallway, "Who that?" Mrs. Lang's door opened 3 inches, and a pair of muddy shoe prints led away into the dark where the gutter emptied. Deputy Rios' radio chatter hissed over the automatic alert feed, as if it were another layer to the same instruction. People gathered at the top of our stairwell, shoes on, rain on their sleeves, voices clipping one into another. She looked, Mrs. Lang, naming Maya before anyone else could. Her voice had that shaking clarity that comes after you test a threshold and then call back to the room. She looked out. I didn't think it meant people. Maya, it sounded like a test. "Ellie, the alert." "It don't look outside," I cut in. I moved my thumb against my forefinger the way I always do when I am thinking too quickly. "Do you know what it said exactly?" Maya folded her arms. "Do not look outside." It sounded like some municipal glitch. I thought they meant like stay inside in general. I thought we could peek. There was a shift then, small and sharp. The neighbors who had been in the hallway turned their faces toward each other. We traded concrete details. Who opened a curtain, who saw a shape, which porch lights died. The exchange itself functioned as a council forming in a crisis. The town's automated speakers repeated the same directive every 8 minutes, and each repetition tightened what we already feared. At 2:15, the recorded voice on my doorbell camera played back a woman's laugh and then a name, my sister's first name. Spoken with the same cadence my sister uses when she calls me about trivial things. I rewound the footage on my phone because repetition feels like control. Seeing motion again like a mechanic inspecting a part. The sound was perfect down to the hitch at the end of the vowel. The speaker said, "Tara, Ella." My throat closed. "That's not her," I said. I felt the watch's steel press into my skin, a physical anchor. Deputy Rios knocked on doors in the block, boots sounding on wet steps, and told us to keep blackout curtains and to remain silent unless we used our names. Use names only for accountability, he said. He was steady in the way people trained to stay steady. But when he left my porch, his shoulders were curved inward. We rationed light like it was fuel. Maya helped me tape garbage bags to the window frames and thumbtacked quilts over any crack that leaked orange street glow. The action was loud. The snapping of tape, the rustle of plastic, the tack of a thumbtack through cloth. Our hands moved because fear made them move. Fear became a set of motions, seal, cover, count, rather than a single emotion to name. That was my first shift, suspicion to fear. I suspected the alert could be true. Seeing it materialize pushed me into active fear. Someone in the hallway suggested an experiment. Call out a name in the street and see if the thing answered. Maya frowned and said, "We shouldn't." "That's what they told us not to do." Mrs. Lang's voice cut in. It already answered. "It my neighbor says name," and the light went out. The argument tightened into a small, sharp exchange, so we test it. "Deputy Rios, no," I said. "Testing means someone volunteers. We can trade people for information." There were rapid back and forth lines then. "Ellie, we have to know." Maya started. "Maya, that's how it learns." Mrs. Lang snapped. "It learns by being watched." "Deputy Rios, we don't have a choice unless someone opens a curtain." I said we decide now to not open them. The council dissolved into whispered plans. Someone suggested calling out a false name to confuse the thing. Someone else suggested recording every exterior sound and playing it back. We did both. Maya volunteered to run the doorbell camera feed, because she had the phone with the largest battery. She crouched on the stoop in the rain for 5 minutes, filming the street through the slatted blinds of a neighbor's window, while we kept the house dark. It was then the mimicry revealed itself. The doorbell camera recorded a voice that sounded exactly like my sister saying, "Ailey." But the timestamp showed no human approaching. The voice repeated names we recognized from the block: Delgado, Prescott, Lang, and then it used a name I had not heard anyone outside say yet. My full name, Ellie Carter, clear and precise, spoken from the curb, as if a person stood there with a megaphone. A light on the next porch died in the middle of that name. My second emotion shift arrived, fear to anger. I threw the phone down on my knee and said, "This isn't a warning anymore. It's a rule. It wants to be seen." Maya's fingers curled around a flashlight in her keychain like a talisman. "If it calls names, it's cataloging us," she said. "Then don't let it catalog you, Mrs. Lang." She sounded older than her years and more like someone who had already made difficult choices. "Seal your windows. Count people's names only for rolls. No one's going outside unless Rios unlocks them." We argued about what to do with the recordings. Deputy Rios wanted to send them to the county office. Mrs. Lang, they should remain local. Maya wanted to live a stream to the regional feed so someone would know. Their choices made things worse. Each suggestion implied exposure. Deputy Rios' attempt to broadcast the feed resulted in the public alert system picking up the same voice and repeating a list of names with an extra breath of static at the end. That night the street felt catalog at 3 a.m. The entity, or whatever we named it, the outside, used a tone pulled from my sister's voice to call a name. The call sounded practiced. The same tempo you'd use to wake someone from a dream. Then it said, "Ellie Carter," louder than the municipal speaker, like a hand knocking on the glass with syllables instead of knuckles. I pressed my forehead to the window frame. My breath fogged at the paint. I felt the chair's fabric scrape under my thigh. My decisions narrowed. Do I look now, or do I let it call me without meeting its gaze? The crowd in the hallway pooled behind me with a chorus of gasps. "Ellie," Maya whispered, "Dunty." Mrs. Lang grabbed my sleeve. "Ellie, do not meet it." The outside named me again, and this time the voices from the street added details. My middle name, the town I grew up in. The voice co-opted a private memory, my father's laugh at his garage radio, and threaded it into the call. That was the twist. The outside didn't only mimic voices, it pulled in the specifics of our lives. An argument broke out then, one of the required confrontations, 3 to 6 rapid lines where the group's plans collided. We lock everyone in their houses, Deputy Rios. We can lock people in, Maya, then we stagger windows so no one looks at the same time, Mrs. Lang suggested. Staggering is a ritual, I said. The less pattern we show, the less it can predict. Maya's hands shook. Ellie, you always think in systems. This is human, she said. Human got pulled from porches. I shot back. Human went missing. That exchange led to a small, decisive event. Mrs. Lang opened her door because she needed fresh air, and she vanished. We saw her slippers on the step with wet footprints, leading away into a smear of darkness. That discovery changed speculation into a confirmed disappearance. I ran down 3 steps to the stoop, throat tight. She's gone, I told Rios. He radioed the precinct 10-4, keep doors closed. Do not light anything. They posted a patrol down at the corner, but no one left the block. We moved into triage mode. Maya and I took inventory. Who was awake, who had family in the house, who had a working phone. The mechanical thing in me, years of working night shifts, turned panic into lists. We made a map of doors and names on an old pizza box, using the Sharpie to trace where people had last been seen. We pinned the board behind the couch as if a literal map would help keep the thing from reading us. We made another rule by consensus. No one says a neighbor's name aloud unless that neighbor is present and speaking. If we had to communicate, we would use last initials and numbers. That rule felt smart and desperate at once. At 4:20, a doorbell camera recorded someone imitating my sister saying my sister's name. But the feed also showed a figure at the curb that wasn't quite a person. Elongated limbs, a matte ash, grey skin that absorbed the streetlight, and a halo of static that lingered in the pixels. The figure tilted its head like a person listening for a step. The camera's audio picked up a low analog hum from the figure's mouth, a sound that translated to static on our phones. Maya stared at the phone for a long time and then said, "It learns the names of people who look. It learns faces it can study. If you don't look, maybe it can learn you." There was a third emotional change then. Anger softened into grim resolve. We taped more layers of cloth across windows. We shifted sleeping arrangements so more people could watch interior doors, and we kept an inventory charted on the pizza box. When Mrs. Lang's name was called on a speaker and no one answered, someone made a sound like it could be grief and then swallowed it into a practical question. How to keep the rest of us alive. The recorded voice found new tricks. It used the cadence of a neighbor and then layered in audio that matched the thump of someone's specific boots on stairs. The doorbell camera picked up a body that, when magnified, had a jaw with vertical fissures that pulsed faint light. The static halo in photos left a vertical streak on the sensor that looked like a white scratch across digital film. At 5:10, as the rain lightened to a mist, the thing outside started to recite the names of people who had kept their curtains open earlier that evening. It enumerated them in a flat, clinical rhythm. Prescott, Delgado, Lang, then it added Ellie Carter. The room went quiet in that particular, raw way where everyone listens to their own breathing. The recorder continued to click softly. Maya's thumb tightened on her flashlight keychain until the plastic creaked. Do we call names back to confuse it? She asked. No, I said, it takes notice when we respond. Every voice is data for it. We argued again, a rapid exchange in which logic and emotion collided. We can hide in numbers. Deputy Rios offered. Numbers don't matter if it knows faces. Mrs. Lang replied, if it knows faces because of sight, then stop giving it sight, I said. We implemented a protocol. Blackout schedules with staggered covers so no 2 houses exposed a window at the same time. People ran shifts at the living room command post, and we took turns monitoring the feeds on borrowed phones. The rhythm narrowed into small tasks. Feed a cat, check a battery, whisper a name. Actions replaced speculation. The mid, Chapter reveal arrived when Maya replayed her clip at higher volume and found the thing outside mimicking not only voices but private phrases. My sister's pet name for me, a childhood joke only my sister uses. The voice said, Ellie, remember the summer at Lake Bund. The memory was specific enough that I felt the muscles in my face contract. How does it know that? Maya doesn't have to know all at once, I said. It builds from observation. We closed ranks. A small group moved through the houses to make certain no one was loafering near windows. Deputy Rios posted a man at the corner with his back to the street, so there would be fewer witnesses for the thing to study. He wore his police jacket reversed so the reflective tape faced the house and not the street. It was an improvisation meant to block the angle of view. The climax arrived at dawn. The thing began to recite names rapidly, a litany that became a hammering wall. Then it said my full name again and added a line I had not told anyone. The brand of my father's watch and how often he de-wind it. That level of detail broke whatever brittle hope we had that observation alone limited it. It sounded like someone reading the inside of my life aloud from a list. I stood at the window with my hand on the frame. The crowd on the landing behind me had narrowed to 3. Maya, Mrs. Lang, Deputy Rios. The thing spoke my name a third time, and its voice slid from the speaker to outside as if it could bridge glass. Ellie Carter, it said. Slower this time. Open. Maya grabbed my shoulder. Don't do it. Don't turn. My body moved before my mind finished. I had always been the kind of person who checks the house when a sound pricks the night. Footsteps, a floorboard, the rustle of a bag. That impulse almost killed us. The window was a single rectangle of rain, reflective glass with a smear of my own breath on the lower left corner. I could see the halo of static in the photograph on my phone. The creature outside tilted its head like a listening dog and then spoke the name of my mother, the name of the road she used to take to the grocery store. Data threaded into a voice. Maya shouted, Ellie! She dragged the blanket from the sill in a motion that knocked my wrist. My hand slipped off the wood. The world narrowed to the texture of the fabric under her palms and the pressure in my chest. I counted. 1, 2, 3. My muscles obeyed the decision to keep the blind closed. Someone screamed from the hallway. A neighbor's voice rose high enough to crack, then cut out. We heard boots falling away, the scrape of something leaving steps. When the scream ended, there was a single new imprint in the mud outside. 2 long, narrow prints that did not match any shoe I had ever seen. We spent the next hour cataloging what the thing had learned, and what, if anything, we might use against it. The twist emerged in a clip Deputy Rios recovered from a knocked-down third-floor security feed. The thing mimicked voices convincingly, but mangled names it had never heard into similar-sounding syllables. When it mangled, it created noise that disrupted a phone's microphone and sometimes erased a short window of footage. That revealed a tactic. If the signal was bad enough, recordings would fail to render the thing's full name calls. By 5:50 we had a plan that felt like mitigation and not hope. Keep curtains sealed. Use initials. Stagger exposure. Keep one person awake to watch interior doors. The pizza box map had 3 names crossed out and 2 times circled. Each cross was a person gone. The final paragraphs of the night became a record. I sat at the couch and turned the recorder on again. My voice was low and close to the mic. This is Ellie Carter. 2:13 a.m. The alert said do not look outside. Maya looked. Mrs. Lang left. The thing uses names it hears to call people. If you can follow blackout protocol, if you must move, do not look at the street. Maya folded cloth into a roll and jammed it into a cracked portion of the blind. Her hands were precise and steady in the way people become when they have to be. Her voice came from the kitchen where she sealed batteries in a flashlight. Ellie, she said, what do we tell anyone who asks? I inhaled, tasting rust and ozone on the air. We tell them to stay inside and not to look. I paused because the tape hissed under my words. The recorder caught the faint analog hum that seemed to come from the corners of the room, the same low pitch we first heard in the doorbell footage. The night slid toward morning with a muted, exhausted tempo. People behind the couch slept in fitful fits, because the fear had settled into the body as a physical tightness, an inability to loosen a jaw. The last event of my night was not a revelation, but a concrete act. Someone on the block, a woman named Torres Maria I had only met briefly, opened her front door to call out to her son, and the porch was empty. Her flashlight light fell on a set of prints leading away. I closed the blind with both hands. The fabric caught on a nail and ripped slightly. The sound of the tear seemed very loud in the living room. Behind the window, the street was a band of dim orange that itched at the edges of the cloth. I recorded one final line before the battery light blinked red. "We were warned," I said. "Do not look outside." My throat made the word hoarse. I set the recorder down beside the couch, put the watch face up, and pressed my palm to the cold of the window frame again. The thing outside spoke a name 2 houses down, and then it swore, perfectly, my full name. I heard it through the wall as if the syllables had been tapped on the glass. The chapter ends with something small and precise. A knock at the back door, 3 soft raps, a rhythm the neighbors had not agreed on. I didn't answer. I didn't move. Maya's hand closed on mine, and we both listened to the knock once more. "Do not look outside," someone said on the alert again. And then the feed cut to static like a shutter closing. I held the blanket where it met the sill, and the last sound that carried into my clenched hands was my name said, once more through the gap under the door. Patient and slow. The recorder clicked off as the battery went dead. I hit the porch steps with wet shoes and a hand already on the rail, because a voice in the street had called Maya Torres, and I could not stand still. Guilt pushed my legs before thought did. Guilt that I had heard the municipal alert at 2:13 and not stopped her when she moved toward the window. The rain spat against my hoodie, the porch light hummed. Officer Ramirez was already there, breathing hard, flashlight angled at the open door. "Maya," I said, shoving the curtain aside with my free hand. "Maya, you hear?" A scent of damp cardboard and ozone filled the entry. The door hung on one hinge. Mrs. Hargrove stood at the corner of the porch, her cardigan soaked, eyes wide and raw as she repeated the same question under her breath. I felt suspicion settle behind my ribs, the old, tight kind that makes your jaw go cold, and it pushed me to move faster. We stepped into the house 2 at a time. The living room light was on, dishes still on the coffee table, the TV silent with an orange alert screen reflecting in the dark. A chair lay on its side, a picture frame stood face down on the carpet. The glass had a web of condensation and a faint halo in the photograph where the image had been disrupted by static. She couldn't have left that fast, Ramirez. Crouching over the front step where muddy, elongated prints cut away toward the yard. He kept calling her name like an incantation, low and sharp. "Maya! Maya!" The prints were wet and sloped, the heel prints thin, the toes spread in a way that made my stomach drop. I remembered the alert earlier, the municipal voice that had said, "Do not look outside." I also remembered Maya walking to the window anyway in the first chapter, how she had leaned and said. It sounded like the siren had forgot to sleep. I had told myself then that it was stubborn curiosity. Now I moved through the house wanting an answer that would make sense. We found no sign of forced entry, no overturned shoes by the door. "Mrs. Hargrove kept murmuring. She looked, didn't she? Like a question that could undo what had already happened. I checked the hallway, pushed open bedroom doors, and felt my hands shake when I picked up a small flashlight on the floor. Tommy, who had come out in pajamas holding a stuffed dinosaur, stood behind Officer Ramirez and did not speak. Outside, the neighborhood had changed. The cul-de-sac held clusters of people in soaked coats. A street lamp flickered with that orange municipal glare, and somewhere a siren cycled in a low loop that carried names in and out on a smear of static. A neighbor's intercom crackled, and then sang the exact tone of Mrs. Hargrove's voice calling, Tommy. Before settling back into a mechanical buzz, they do not look outside, Mrs. Hargrove, as if the sentence could be a barrier. She kept winding her cardigan around her hands. Maya looked. I saw her by the window. She looked. The words fell like stones. Officer Ramirez wiped rain off his brow and said, "We split. We check houses, windows, trees. Ellie, you come with me, back alleys and the tree line. Mrs. Hargrove, stay with Tommy. Don't open anything. Don't say names out loud. Close everything." He turned to the group and barked orders that meant someone had tried to take control of a situation that was clearly breaking free. I nodded. I had to know where Maya had gone and why something had called her name in the street. The suspicion that people were breaking the rule to see it for themselves shifted into a different feeling when Ramirez led us down the side path toward the back alleys. Fear, my voice shortened. I kept it in my throat. We moved house to house, checking windows and porches. Mrs. Hargrove shouted questions into dark windows. A few doors opened and eyes peered out and closed again. Two neighbors from the far side of the block, Bowers and Call, crossed through wet lawns and accused each other loudly of unbolting a curtain. That argument snapped into a heated trading of blame. "You left your back sliding open?" "No, you called him to the fence." The words were short and sharp. "Stop it, Officer Ramirez. We done help things by yelling. We look for people, we secure the houses." Names and loud talk draw attention. He sounded like a radio officer trying to hold together a system that was losing its seams. The siren tried to mimic his voice for a moment and said, in a broken cadence, "Officer Ramirez." "Officer Ramirez." Something in the town's noise had learned to imitate us. We split, as Ramirez had said. Mrs. Hargrove sat with Tommy under her porch light and kept humming a lullaby while she checked the street for movement. Bowers and Cole moved farther down the block, something like shame and accusation trading places on their faces. I walked with Ramirez through a back lane that smelled of wet mulch and crushed newspaper. Trash bins clattered in the wind. The alley cut behind a row of mailboxes, and the trees at the far edge of the yard folded black against the sky. We found the photograph under a porch step because Ramirez's flashlight hit the gloss at an angle. It had been taped to the underside of the step with what looked like water, stiffened Scotch tape. The photo was a Polaroid of Maya, taken at some earlier picnic, her hair pinned back, laughing, except a faint vertical halo of static ringed her face. Like a burn in the emulsion, they take pictures. Ramirez, his voice small, they leave things. They study. He set his palm on the photo like a man who wanted to understand the temperature of it. I lifted it with the tip of 2 fingers. The back of the frame was damp. There were small elongated depressions in the grass leading away, as if someone had dragged their feet toward the tree line. We followed those prints where the yard gave up to underbrush. The prints elongated, and the soil had been pressed down in a single, slow arc. Ramirez lowered himself and pressed a gloved finger in one indentation. "Not human," he said, but he did not sound certain. He had been a patrol officer here long enough to know the feel of different footprints. The way these toes fanned did not match utility boots or sneakers. A sound cut through the night. The municipal alert, low and modulated, repeating a neighbor's name in broken syllables that glitched like radio interference. Mrs. Hargrove, Mrs. Har, and then the tone collapsed into static. The voice had learned the cadence of our calls and used it. We moved faster. I felt fear shift into containment, focus into action. I searched under porches, opened garbage cans, shined lights up at windows. Ramirez checked vents and the gaps beneath doors. Every time the siren cried a name, the group stiffened and counted heads. We came upon an intercom at an intersection near the town's emergency siren. The plastic case had been pried open, and inside lay a slim strip of something like a circuit board coated in a film of dust and faint static. The strip hummed when I touched it and for a second translated the town's siren into a dozen overlapping whispers. I pulled my hand back like burned skin. It hijacked municipal channels, Ramirez, or it learned them. Either way, we can't trust the system anymore. He sounded older in that sentence, as if a part of his training had been folded into defeat. While we stood there, the siren began calling names in warped tones. It first whispered a neighbor who lived 2 doors down, then another. The pattern was not random. It called people who had looked earlier in the night. Then a voice came from a curtained living room across the street. The figure at the window was impossible at first glance. It stood too still, limbs long and too slender, its face a smudge of ash, gray that drank the porch light. It tilted its head the way a person listens when someone speaks. For a moment I thought it was Maya, because it mimicked her breath pattern and the tilt of her head. Then Ramirez, Don T look, and my mouth tasted of copper. Mrs. Hargrove stepped forward and peered through a parted curtain. That's not. She started, Mrs. Hargrove. Stop, I said, but she had already looked fully, and the thing at the window made a small sound like plastic dragged across glass. The intercom across the street repeated her own voice, and then sang it back with a burl of static that made the hairs rise on my neck. A neighbor screamed once and then was silent. The thing at the window made no motion to cross the glass. Instead it pressed a flatness against the pane that could have been a hand but left no wrist. Light sank into it. It bent the reflection, and the living room lamp dimmed as if the featureless surface had swallowed photons. The neighbor's name left the intercom in a slow, articulated tone, and then the siren picked it up and carried it away until the syllables were hollow and long. I reached for the doorknob to the house across the street, and Ramirez caught my arm with a firm grip. Ellie, he said. We can tea. As he spoke, the thing made a sound that was not quite a human whisper, but arranged itself into a voice I knew. Ellie Carter. Ellie Carter. The voice came layered under low analog static, and then lilted in the exact cadence of my grandmother's telephone call when she used to say my name. I stepped back so fast my foot knocked a rock into the gutter. The shock of recognition slid into a new kind of fear. The entity did not just call names. It learned the particular way a name felt in a person's mouth. It could mimic familiar voices to draw people to the glass. We saw this at Maya's. Mrs. Hargrove, eyes on the figure, it called her. She went to the window and then she did not finish the sentence. Her hand tightened on Tommy's shoulder until his small body twisted. Ramirez put his palm on my shoulder. We need to count who's missing. We need to secure the houses we can. No names allowed. We write them down. We lock them away. Keep hush. If it learns voices, talking risks more. He moved with a decisiveness I recognized from years of patrol work. It was a decision to contain a civilian triage. We ran between houses, slamming shutters and boarding windows with anything we could find. People handed us plywood planks and tightened screws. Tommy cried once when the boards went up over his father's bedroom and then stopped because he could hear the names outside being repeated in very slow, wet cadences that seemed to make the whole street breathe. At Ellie's house, my house, where we ended up as a makeshift command point, Officer Ramirez took my recorder, and I set the small device on the coffee table. The room smelled of wet cloth and cold metal where a roof had leaked earlier that week. We rolled the blinds down and taped them. Mrs. Hargrove counted out a list of neighbors who had gone missing and placed each slip of paper into a shoebox. Write their full names, birth dates if you know them. Ramirez instructed we keep it private. We don't say the names unless necessary. We don't let it learn any more. He spoke like a man giving CPR instructions. I watched him, then watched the siren outside that pulsed like a distant engine. The recorder light went red, and I felt my throat tighten. Guilt had driven me to that porch. Now a different emotion threaded through my voice, protectiveness, so raw it made me clench my jaw. I started the log. My voice came out low, measured, the way I had practiced telling the story without letting it turn to panic. This is Ellie Carter. It's 2:20, 2 a.m. The municipal alert sounded at 2:13. Mayor Torres was at her window despite the advisory. We found her door ajar and a Polaroid taped under the porch step. Several people are missing. Officer Ramirez, Mrs. Hargrove Bowers, caller present. Tummy is safe. I paused to breathe and the tape recorded the tiny hiccup of air. Mrs. Hargrove put a fresh slip into the box. Mayor Torres, she whispered under her breath, and I could see the urge to speak it aloud fight with her fingers. Don't say it, Ramirez, write it. Keep it sealed. Only read the list when necessary and under counsel. If we speak, it learns our sound. His hands were steady as he jammed another slip into the shoebox. We make a names list. We make rules. Windows closed, no mirrors, lights off if you can. No one looks. If the siren calls anyone, we move them away from windows immediately. The night moved into a new, brittle routine. We barricaded the small group into a few houses and worked in pairs to search further. Bowers and Cole swore at each other once more and then began to help board a stained glass window. Ramirez assigned them tasks to keep them from arguing. The siren kept trying to mimic civilian voices, and each time it succeeded a person went quiet and listened, and sometimes got up to look despite the rules. At one point, a neighbor named Lopez, he had been part of the first group to gather, rushed in with a battery, powered radio tucked under his arm. It misses. Ortega, he burst out. I heard it through the speaker. It her name. I thought I heard her voice on the radio. He pressed the radio into my hands. The device hissed static, and then for a second a voice that sounded like Mrs. Ortega whispered a grocery list, then dissolved into a rasping version of her name. We thought the alert would protect us. Lopez. I left a window open, just to check the street light. I only looked for a second. He put his face in his hands and did not meet our eyes. That admission gave the night a new edge. It was no longer only curiosity that got people taken. Slight, accidental acts, an open window, a glance to see if the street light still worked had consequences. The surprise twist here was procedural. Standard municipal behavior, human error, now intersected with something that listened. The climax arrived fast and flat. We were returning to the command living room with boards and tape, and someone at the back door shouted. On the house diagonally across, a living room light had been left dim. A curtain shifted. The thing stood on the porch, press, flat against the window, mimicking roof lines and the angle of a familiar head tilt. Mrs. Hargrove whispered, Ellie, and the thing responded by saying my name in the voice of my grandmother the way it had earlier. It drew my name out like a long vowel, and then it added another syllable I had not expected. A second neighbor, a surname that the siren had not yet called. The voice layered the two names and the intercom took them and fed them back, slow and patient. Someone else, Bowers, moved toward the house despite the boards. He had argued all night and anger had thinned into a rashness that looked a lot like bravery. Stop, Bowers! Cole shouted, and then they had a rapid exchange. Don't you dare! He looked at it, he looked! No! We have to. Bowers, listen. That sequence of shouts was 3 seconds of breath out and fury. And it ended with Bowers looking directly at the featureless face pressed against the glass. He one thing. Who's there? The word hung in the air. The thing filled that silence with a voice that sounded like Bowers' dead brother. It called his name in a tone he could not refuse, and then it pulled the light from the window. Bowers' mouth opened once and then closed, and when we rushed to the window the glass held only the smear where he had been reflected. The silhouette on the outside had not moved. The board across the sill had dark condensation where a hand might have been. The group recoiled and then moved. Ramirez kicked the boards free, and the street light cut hard across the living room floor. We found Bowers' jacket on the porch, damp and still warm. No one could say how long it had been there. There were no further prints into the yard. We sealed windows and counted the missing. The shoebox grew heavier. I watched Mrs. Hargrove close the lid and tape it with a focused, brittle calm. Her hands were steady when they wrote Maya's name and Bowers' name and the others. Each entry folded another piece of the night's logic into place. The entity learned names through observation and voice. Municipal systems could be opted into repeating what it learned. People who looked were at risk of being claimed. We made rules and tried to make them simple. Ramirez repeated them all like a script he wanted the group to memorize. No looking, no names allowed. Record names on paper, then seal those papers. Move anyone called away from windows. If the siren repeats a name, treat the home as compromised and bring occupants to a central, boarded location. He it flat like a man setting watch orders. I recorded the rules into the small device. I felt a need to be precise, because I knew the tape might be used later by someone who came after us. I spoke crisply. Rule 1. Do not look outside. Rule 2. Do not vocalize names within earshot of windows, doors, or municipal devices. Rule 3. Secure all reflective surfaces. Rule 4. Keep a written list and never read it aloud. Rule 5. If a name is spoken on the siren, move the named residents' occupants to a sealed location immediately. When I finished, the recorder clicked softly as the battery conservation mode engaged. We had done something concrete. We had turned panic into a plan. That action brought me an odd, brief clarity. The guilt that had driven me to Maya's porch had been converted into procedure. That shift was one of my emotion changes for the night, guilt to protectiveness, and it made me act with a steadier hand. But another shift came sooner than I expected. While we were bundling blankets and counting names, the siren spoke a new name in a clipped, unfamiliar accent. It was not a neighbor. It was my own name again, joined by the last name of Officer Ramirez. The timing beat like a pulse in my ears, and I felt a new panic spike into place. Doubt about whether our rules were enough. Ramirez strode into the street, flashlight cut across the yard. We move people now, he said. We create a chain to the school gym. We get the kids, the elderly. We ferry them. We done leave anyone in an exposed house, and as we prepared to move, I made a decision that showed the other emotion shift. From protectiveness to resigned determination. I remained at the command point with the recorders and the list because someone had to keep a permanent account. I could not risk going with the escort if my absence meant the list was left unguarded and spoken aloud. I slid a pen under the shoebox and locked the lid with packing tape. Finding the balance felt fragile. I tightened the shoebox into a crate and set it on the couch. Mrs. Hargrove pressed a damp cloth to Tummy's forehead. Ramirez clapped his hands and pulled together a small column of neighbors to carry anyone who could not walk. Lopez checked his radio and then wrapped it in plastic. Before they left, I told Ramirez, if you take them, you call out each name only when the door is locked and the window is covered. You repeat me and then cover your mouth. Do not let it sample voices in the open. He nodded, the movement small but decisive. They formed a chain and moved out under the siren light. I watched them go until they were a string of silhouettes. Mrs. Hargrove closed the front door and latched it. The house felt smaller after they left. The silence was not peaceful. It was an expectation, a waiting for the siren to do something new. I recorded the final entry for the night with my voice steadier than I would have expected. I listed the names again, read the rules into the tape, and described the Polaroid and the prints by the tree line. I made note of Bowers' jacket on the porch and of the intercom board. I described, concretely, without metaphor, how the thing pressed the glass and how light dimmed where it stood. At the very end of the log I wrote a short, clear note for anyone who might find the tape. Seal the shoebox. Do not read names aloud. Keep to the rote list. Do not let it learn your voice. The recorder cut. I set it down and the room held the small click with more weight than it deserved. Outside, the siren kept making a slow loop of names and static. I could see Ramirez's flashlight swinging down the block. I could see tiny motion at the corner where the street met the trees. Something still sitting, waiting beyond the reach of our lights. We taped the last window and turned off unnecessary lights. Mrs. Hargrove wrote one more slip and slid it into the shoebox. She sealed the box and handed me the roll of tape. I wrapped it tight. The shoebox had become a ledger and a shield. I put the recorder back in my pocket and set the shoebox on the high shelf above the fireplace where nobody would casually reach. The rule I made then was specific and physical. Write names, fold them, tape the fold, and then store the box out of sight. Don read the list to anyone. Do not use voices to confirm identity. When I latched the living room door, a new sound blurred in from the street, soft, layered, and deliberate. It spoke two names together, slow and careful, like a teacher reciting spelling. I could not tell if it pronounced them to call or to learn. I pressed my palm to the wood and felt my heartbeat push cold across my skin. Ramirez returned with one of the neighbors who had led the evacuations. He closed the curtain and set 2 more blankets on the couch. He looked at me and said, "We did what we could tonight. We keep the list, we keep the shoebox, we move tomorrow if needed." I nodded. My emotions had braided into something that felt like responsibility mixed with a fresh, small guilt for staying behind. They left me with the shoebox and the recorder, and with the knowledge that the entity was learning names through any voice it could sample. I locked the door. The last scene of the night was small and concrete. A knock on the porch, 3 slow raps that matched no neighbor's pattern. I froze. The knock was deliberate. I moved to the window and pulled the curtain aside with my thumb. Outside there was nothing but a wet copy of a local paper clinging to the doormat, its headline blurred by rain. The porch light hummed. The intercom, somewhere down the street, spoke a name that had not appeared on our list yet, low and patient. I closed the curtain, wrapped my hands around the shoebox, and sat on the couch with the recorder in my lap. I began a new draft of rules on a fresh slip of paper. The siren sang names into the night, and I wrote them down without speaking them aloud. We sealed the last window, and I began reading names into the recorder. The siren answered with one more voice. A voice from the street said, "Maya Torres," and 3 porch lights went cold. I moved before thinking. Rain on my hoodie, feet hitting the step, backpack slapping my shoulder as I ran across the tidy front lawns. Guilt pushed me harder than fear. I had heard the alert at 2:13 and found Maya walk toward her window a minute later, and that guilt drove my legs now. I slammed onto Maya's porch and called her name until my breath came out like steam. The front door stood open a hand's width, dark inside except for a rectangle of wet light on the hardwood where someone had stepped back from the window. Guilt is the root of my choice in that instant. I wanted to make up for not stopping her earlier, to prove that I could act where caution had failed. Doubt spun behind every step. Should I have stayed inside? Would my moving make things worse? Those questions shifted into a sharper fear when I saw the single wet footprint leading toward the window, and the curtain pinched as if something had leaned there. I smelled cold rain and the copper tang of a cut thumb on my palm, and I felt my pulse in my teeth. I pushed the door the rest of the way and dropped to the living room floor to look at the footprint. Neighbors gathered on the porch in a tight knot. I could hear Mrs. Hendricks whisper, he called her name, and Mr. Kovac arguing, we should call the police. Maya's blanket lay crumpled on the couch. Her keys hung from the coat rack. The television was off, but a blurred photograph on the mantel showed Maya at a backyard barbecue, hair tied back, smiling with a child on her hip. That picture stopped me because the child was not our missing boy. It was empty arms and a garden hose behind her. The photograph felt like a ledger of ordinary ownership, name, neighbor, life, and yet the window contained a contradiction. The curtain tapered where something had pressed. Ellie! Mrs. Hendricks, did you see? Did you see anything at the window? No, I said, I was late getting here. You were at your house. Kovac, you saw her move, Ellie. His voice held accusation. The crowd on the porch sharpened. Voices layered. Speculation, fear, instruction. Maya was a neighbor we all liked. The idea that she had looked despite the alert made people angrier than scared for a second. That anger shifted quickly when someone in the cluster held up a phone and said, "Look at this." The phone's screen showed a picture taken through Maya's window. The photo was grainy, but the dark outside had a faint, pulsating halo where the curtain had pressed. The halo looked like an overexposed ring of static. Down the center, a thin vertical fissure of pale light ran from where a face would be down to the sill. No silhouette beyond the halo, just the fissure and the halo and the wet smear on the glass. The neighbor who took the photo, Jason, told us, "You can see it. It leaves something." That line changed my doubt into a hard, practical panic. The thing outside left evidence. We debated the photograph's meaning for 2 minutes, and then the municipal alert blared again through car radios and open windows. The recorded voice had the same municipal tone, but the second message layered a scraped audio listing of addresses in a slow, deliberate cadence: 32 Elm, 34 Elm, 36 Elm, 38 Elm. The announcer's voice and a low analog hum undercut the syllables. As it ran, porch lights around us clicked off in unison, then on, then off. The pattern felt like a counting of possession. They rereading houses, Mr. Kovac. They remapping us. His words were flat, used more to order than to understand. I felt doubt fracture into anger, and then into a need to act. We decided to move quickly. Darken houses, station watchers at key windows, 2 people teams at each house. The plan was simple and concrete. Block sightlines, tape curtains, check every threshold, and it gave everyone something to do. "Ellie, you watch the north window." "Mrs. Hendricks, you know that side best." "I'll watch the bedroom," I said. "I can keep the child calm." The child arrived then. A small neighbor boy named Tyler who belonged to Jason's sister. He came barefoot in a raincoat, shaking, holding a stuffed raccoon. "Is Maya okay?" he asked. His voice made a pause in the plan. The child's presence created a split in the group's resolve. The need to protect became personal. That pushed me from a defensive plan to a personal temptation to look. We moved house to house with flashlights cut to dim. I taped a sheet over Maya's living room window edges, even though the group wanted thicker blackout curtains. Jason and 2 other men took turns standing on the side porch with a phone camera, aimed out through a crack in the boards, to try and capture anything without exposing themselves. The recording showed nothing but rain and the wet sheen of lawns. At one point Jason swore softly and said, "There's a halo again, but no body." He sounded hollow, and then he walked away, because the sight made him sick. We set up watches by the back windows, and then the municipal alert scrambled open again. This time the voice said names in pairs. First it said, "Maya Torres," then a delay, then Tyler Harris. The delay between names felt like a thread pulling. The neighborhood shuddered as if a door had closed somewhere in the middle of the block. People exchanged looks. My hands tightened on a roll of tape until my knuckles whitened. The voice on the municipal feed had a human cadence and an underscored static like someone pressing an old radio mic close to their mouth. Doubt became a second emotion. Doubt about the plan, about following orders, about whether the municipal system was compromised or used by the outside itself. The doubt caused the group to argue in quick, short lines. We cut the feeds. "Mrs. Hendricks, we block every window now." "No," Jason replied. "We need eyes. We need to know where it goes. We leave the child alone." "Meh. Kovac, Tyler stays with me," I said. The argument moved in tight bursts, 3 to 5 quick exchanges before a new event hit. A scraping sound at Maya's bedroom window. The scraping arrived from outside, precise and slow, like someone dragging a fingernail along glass. The sound forced all of us to the threshold of the house. The child's breathing shortened into a quick, startled series of breaths. My mouth went dry. I stepped into the hallway and the scraping stopped. Then a whisper threaded under our breath, not from the municipal feed, but from right outside the bedroom window. It a name we did not expect. It Mr. Kovac's wife's name, Clear, careful, and then it repeated a childhood nickname I had never heard called in years. The nicknames were private. Hearing them said the outside new detail. Fear snapped tight in me. We debated options again. Some wanted to sprint across the street, to confront whatever stood under the streetlight. Others wanted to board up every window and wait for dawn. I argued to split the difference. Keep most houses dark and silent, but send a single pair to check Maya's bedroom window because the child's whimpering made the choice impossible to defer. That was the forbidden impulse, to look and to save. Before we could finish, Tyler blinked and pointed. There, he said in a small voice, there is somebody outside. He pressed the stuffed raccoon into my hands and hurried back to the couch where he curled under a throw. I moved to the bedroom door and placed my palm flat on the wood. The house smelled like wet wool and lemon soap. My watch read 2:31. The streetlight through the curtains made a faint rectangle on the floor. I felt another shift then, fear transforming into fierce protective focus. My hands moved automatically, taping the curtain tighter, checking the latch on the window, reaching for the old analog watch on my wrist to use as a makeshift mirror to peer without moving my head. That was the attempt at ingenuity. The watch's glass caught a sliver of reflected light and I raised it toward the drawn curtain. Nothing showed. I told myself that was proof we could keep the child safe without opening the curtains. Then a sound broke through. The municipal speaker in the distance warbled our street, and then urged a name, Maya Torres again, but this time the voice added a soft phrase after her name. She looked, the added phrase landed in the room like accusation. People around me murmured. Jason cursed and slapped the side of his head. Meh. Kovac, someone tell him to stop calling names. Someone, he finish. His sentence broke as the speaker listed an address on the block slowly, the syllables spaced like steps. An outside voice called, window, bedroom, window, and not a single person in the hall needed to be told which bedroom. My heart did not race in an abstract way. I felt it in the base of my skull, a pressure behind my eyes. Tyler whimpered. I looked at him and the child's smallness made the decision a sharp one. I could keep my eyes shut and risk some other house losing its occupant, or I could look and possibly save the child in the next room. That was the moral fork, act to possibly save one, or maintain the rule and risk another loss. I opened the curtain an inch and froze. The outside was not a face in the window. It was a still vertical absence where light did not behave. The thing outside tilted its head the way a human might, and then the municipal feed layered a whisper on top of the hum and said my name, not as accusation, but with an uncanny familiarity, like someone reading a note. Ellie Carter, the syllables slid under my ribs. I snapped the curtain shut, and my hands shook so much that the tape peeled from the wood. That moment pivoted the chapter into its climax. Everything compressed. Neighbors shouting, a thin crowd forming at the door, the child sobbing into a blanket. I heard Maya's name called again and then a new, softer voice layered, like two microphones feeding into the same channel, saying, "Look, Ellie." For a second the words felt like bait. My guilt threaded into doubt and then into a raw, animal protective surge. I felt the child's weight in the room as if it were a lever I could pull. Don T. Look, Mrs. Hendricks hissed in a broken sentence. You saw a halo in the photo, right? Jason, we can take another picture and show everyone. No. Mir. Kovac, we can spread it. We can name it. His voice held an edge of religion now, a belief in rules. The group formed two camps again. Those who wanted to document and those who wanted to hide. The debate's cadence was short and urgent. Ellie, please, Tyler whispered, hand against my knee. His small request reordered everything. I crouched next to him, kept my voice low, and spoke simple sentences. Tyler, hold this, I said, handing him the raccoon. Stay here. Don T. Move. Close your eyes if you want. He did as I asked. His breathing slowed by a fraction. Then something happened that none of us expected. The photo on Jason's phone, left open in the hallway, glitched. The image distorted, showing the hollow wobble, and then the fissure of light split like a seam. For a second face appeared inside the fissure. Not human, not a photo of anyone we knew, but a mimic, an imperfect imitation of Maya's smile pasted wrong across where a mouth might be. The phone died at that instant, the screen cracking into a web of white lines like a starburst. It can copy faces. Jason. His voice was small. It learns from being seen. That line became the twist that altered how we understood the earlier calls. The outside did not just name. It took textures of people, faces, laughter, nicknames, and used them to draw attention. Each look gave it more material. The argument dissolved into action. We pulled the heavy blanket from the couch and jammed it under the bedroom door. Mrs. Hendricks and Mir. Kovac wrapped Tyler in another blanket and sat with him in the kitchen, trying to make a game of counting ceiling tiles. People moved with focused tasks. One group checked for unlocked doors, another unplugged the municipal speaker feed on the lamppost. A young couple with sleeping bags began a rotation schedule to keep watch without actively looking. I realized in the middle of doing the work that guilt had shifted again, this time into a grim clarity. I had no illusions that my earlier hesitation would be undone by action. I only wanted to reduce harm. As dawn crept closer, the municipal feed began to degrade. The voice stammered and then broke into static between lines of names. The street outside had fewer shadows. At one point, while we listened to the degraded feed, we noticed posts emerging online from the neighborhood board, rules written in short, clipped sentences by people we knew. Do not look. Tape windows. Do not post photos. The rules felt like a town file being rewritten in real time. Maya's house became a focal point for neighbors to gather evidence and decide on protocol. Jason, who had taken the photograph, confessed he had opened his window a crack earlier to try to capture audio evidence, and that the photo was his attempt to save us. I thought if we had proof we could get help, he said. I thought I could stop it. The confession served as a second, concrete twist. One of our own had tried to fight the rule to help, and that action likely made things worse for Maya. People reacted with rapid, short lines. You were told not to open windows. Mr. Kovac, we needed proof. Jason snapped. You put us at risk. Mrs. Hendricks. The argument had edge, 3 to 6 quick exchanges. Then a neighbor named Renee intervened with a different plan. Renee had spent nights working at the municipal communications office 10 blocks over. She knew where the municipal server racks sat and how the broadcast system pushed alerts. She proposed a targeted outage. If someone could cut power to the feed at the transfer relay, the outside might lose the municipal pathway it used to call names. Her suggestion was practical, specific, and it forced a distribution of roles. Renee, I can get us into the relay. It's a 5-minute trip. 2 people. It's risky, but it's the only way to stop it from mapping us. Her voice was a quiet resolve that made people taste hope. That offer shifted emotion toward purpose. Fear braided into resolve and then into a communal will to act. I volunteered with Jason. We checked our watches, slung on rain jackets, and slipped out an alley toward the communications box under a streetlight. The wet pavement reflected orange, and the relay box sat tucked behind a low chain link fence, dripping with rain. We crouched behind a dumpster, exchanged a quick plan, and moved. I felt the old analog watch heavy on my wrist, a small instrument anchoring me to the present. We worked fast and we worked with simple tools. Jason cut the lock and I pried the service panel. Inside, servers hummed, cables tied with heat, shrink, a small battery backup glowing soft green. Renee's instructions were precise. Cut power to the transmitter, leave the ups alone long enough to crash the feed, and then reseal the box. I severed a yellow cable with a pocket knife. The relay shuddered, emitted a tiny beep, and then the municipal voice fell into a interrupted stutter. The street around us went quiet like someone had turned down the world. Back at Mayas, the feed did not immediately stop calling names, but it began to fragment. Static replaced syllables and the cadence stretched. People exhaled in that house as if they had been holding their breath for hours. The daylight gray edged over the roofs. We had a small victory. The municipal pathway was damaged and the calls were patchwork. Yet the outside remained present. We could still feel it in the window frames, in the halo of photos. The change in the feed pushed emotion toward cautious relief, not victory. Inside Maya's bedroom, Tyler slept finally, curled around the raccoon. Mrs. Hendricks brewed instant coffee in the kitchen and set a cup in front of me. I held the cup and let the bitter heat hit my palms. Dawn light pressed thin through the kitchen curtains. Neighbors who had been sharp and accusatory in the night sat with tired faces and shorter words. Jason sat across from me and said simply, "I'm sorry." He looked younger than he had all night. "We all are," I said. The neighborhood compiled rules on paper and online. Tape windows, unplug the municipal feed if safe to do so, do not post images, rotate watchers in pairs, and keep children away from windows. People wrote them again and again because repeating them felt like building a wall. Those rules were concrete actions birthed from fear and guilt and a hard decision to protect what remained. As light grew, an unexpected phone call came through from the regional office, someone we could not fully trust. But the caller's voice stammered into static and said one line clearly, "We are compiling names." "Do not." The call dropped. The speaker on the desk buzzed and then died. That interruption made the night a closed thing. Something had tried to control our response, and we'd taken an active step against it. We had losses to account for. A neighbor's house 3 down had its door open and found a chair overturned and personal items scattered. The family inside was gone. Another porch light showed a smear of dry blood on the step. Those discoveries landed like physical ledgers of consequence and forced our group to document and to bury the easy illusions that staying silent would be enough. By the time the sun lifted a weak strip above the horizon, the street looked like a town that had had an argument with night and had not won cleanly. People moved slowly, checking on each other, trading names of who had been seen, who had checked windows, who had broken the rule. We wrote down who had looked. Naming the people who had looked felt both necessary and obscene. It felt like cataloging victims, and also like feeding the thing we feared. I recorded a short log that morning on my phone. Factual list: what we'd done, who had acted, steps taken to disable the feed. In the message I left an instruction. Do not look out windows until further notice. Tape them tightly. Move children away from sightlines. Share the protocol only within the neighborhood group. Guilt and clarity coexisted in that instruction. I wanted to give people a tool and a guardrail. At noon, the municipal feed came back in a limited, patched form and read a public safety statement that had no names. An official face on the screen avoided eye contact with the camera as if the act of looking might signal something. The town declared a temporary lockdown and set up an official neighborhood hotline manned by volunteers. People complied because compliance felt like work. When someone posted a photo of the cracked phone screen on the board without caption, the post was quickly removed by neighbors who labeled it dangerous. That afternoon, Jason knocked on my door. He held a small envelope with a snapped photograph inside, a close-up of the Hallows fissure. He handed it to me without saying anything. "Take it to Renee," he said finally. "She should have a copy in case my phone dies again." I slipped the photograph into my jacket. We met Renee behind the municipal relay the next day. She had a clear plan. Document the evidence but keep it offline and distribute printed copies only to trusted hands. She proposed assembling a neighborhood archive locked in an office 2 towns over. The archive would contain photos, witness logs, and the rules we had made. She wanted to create a living protocol that could be passed to other towns. Renee's eyes were steady when she spoke, and that steadiness rewired the group's sphere into a mission: gather, limit exposure, and keep people from looking. When I think back to that night, the hardest concrete moment is the choice at the bedroom window. To look or not to look. My hands had grief in them then, not words. By looking, I might have saved a child in another house. By not looking, I might have kept someone else alive. The decision was not a metaphor. It was a set of actions with measurable consequences. In the end, we chose a middle path: send pairs to disable public pathways, hide children, and assemble a watch that never used direct sight, but relied on peripheral methods like closed-circuit infrared cameras that did not render a human, visible face. The choice felt like a compromise between guilt and responsibility. Weeks later, the neighborhood rules hardened into standard practice. People added details. Cover photographs with opaque sleeves before handling. Never speak names near a municipal device. Rotate watches using two-person teams, and keep an analog watch on hand in every house to measure real time against municipal time. We listed those rules like an inventory. The outside learned from us and from our mistakes. Each informal rule slowly became a small, brittle ritual to survive. Maya's house stayed under neighbor watch for 3 days. We found traces, smears on the sill, a smear of static on a phone screen that suggested the outside had been there and had learned something it kept. A cadence for our names. We never found Maya. No one saw a body. The town assigned volunteers to check missing person databases and to score camera footage from the main road. But the footage offered nothing beyond an ordinary rain and a parked car. The evidence the outside left was always partial and specific. A halo in a photograph, a fissure of light in a window, a name whispered on a feed. At a community meeting later, Jason stood and said, "I thought proof would get us help. I was wrong." His voice was steady but small. Renee responded with a practical ledger. "Proof can be dangerous. We need controlled data, not exposure." The two of them argued in short lines that night. 3 quick exchanges about transparency versus safety. The room felt like a jury deliberating not on guilt, but on method. We established an archive. We printed the cracked photograph and stored it in a lockbox. We tagged it with the time stamp and the names of witnesses and the note, "Do not reproduce digitally." The rule forced a different kind of memory, one that required effort to access and therefore reduced accidental observation. The archive became a quiet ritual for the town. Paper logs, handwritten notes, a binder labeled with a low-case title so it would not attract attention. People who visited the binder had to sign in and agree to keep the contents private. Months passed with a brittle calm. The municipal feed continued at low power and issued only practical statements. The outside appeared less often in direct ways. We learned it adapted when we adapted. Once on a rainless night, the feed hummed and called the name of a volunteer who had taken down a sign, but it did not call anyone who had avoided looking. That pattern taught us the cruel arithmetic. Observation fed it. I keep the printed photograph folded in an inner pocket of my jacket. When I take it out, I do not stare at it for long. I only check the edge, the vertical fissure of light, the halo that never resolves into a face. Handling it is a ritual now. I place it in the lockbox once more and close the clasp. The action is precise and concrete. It replaces pleas and midnight running. The town has not recovered everything it lost. 2 families moved away in the months after. A handful of houses still have boards over windows. Children avoid standing near windows in daylight as if the habit can become a shield. We still teach the rules to newcomers. When someone mentions the municipal alert in conversation, voices drop and people avoid eye contact with the street. At the end of the day, what we learned is ugly and specific. Looking teaches the outside names and textures. Names taught to it become hooks. That knowledge shaped our final, practical rule. Do not look, do not record, disable public feeds where safe, and keep any evidence offline and controlled. Those are not slogans, they are steps you can take. The last scene of that night closes on a simple, concrete beat. I taped the final sheet across Maya's window, pressed a thumb in the wet edge of the tape until it stuck, and heard Tyler in the next room exhale steady enough to sleep. I left the house in the small grey hour with the folded photograph in my pocket and the log recorded on my phone. I walked down the block and looked at porch lights flicking as neighbors checked locks and doors. We had a set of rules now, and we had a list of names we would not speak aloud. The municipal feed degraded into static again, as if to remind us that silence is both weapon and shelter. I sat on the curb, opened the voice memo, and spoke into my phone in a measured voice. Do not look. Tape your windows. Keep children away from sightlines. I stopped the recording, saved it, then pressed the phone into my pocket. Outside, the street was quiet except for rain on gutters. A faint halo lingered in an old photograph tucked in my jacket. I walked away, and the town went on with its rules, its list, and the careful, watchful work of those who stayed behind.